Now part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a dark side.
At 8:30 a.m. on April 14th, 2024, emergency dispatchers received a call from a man at the 5-star Penny Hill Park Hotel in Bagshot, Surrey, England. The caller, James Cartwright, said that he had just woken up to find his ex-fiancé, Samantha Mickleburgh, lying lifeless in the bed beside him. He told dispatch that Samantha might have fallen from the bed and hit her nose or simply died in her sleep. But as investigators began to peel back the layers of Samantha's death and James's life, they discovered a very different story. What initially sounded like a tragic and unexplained death would eventually become a murder investigation centered on control, manipulation, and obsession. Welcome, lambs. Welcome to a new episode of Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide, your weekly true crime podcast where I bring you cases of relationships that turn to murder. I am your host, Kai, and in today's case, I tell you about a woman who agreed to spend one final weekend with her ex-fiancé, only for that decision to cost her her life. But before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe to Love and Murder on whatever platform you're currently listening on so you don't miss any upcoming cases. The best way you can subscribe, though, is through the Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. You can subscribe for free, where you do get some bonuses. But if you want bonus episodes, after shows, case extras, and so much more, then choose one of our bonus tiers starting at $3 a month and above. For instance, one of the bonus episodes currently available on the Patreon covers a case of a 7-year-old girl who disappeared while playing outside on her family's property. And what began as a missing child investigation quickly turned into a race against time when investigators discovered that the person responsible had been on the property that very day. Now, this episode, it was very, very, very hard for me to cover. It was, oh my God. And you'll hear, just join the Patreon and you'll hear this episode. It was so difficult. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. This was the case of Athena Strand. And then this week's bonus episode covers one of the most disturbing nursing home cases I've ever come across. What started as a romance between two nursing aides evolved into a deadly secret, with vulnerable elderly patients becoming the center of a twisted pact that investigators said bound the couples together. Join the Patreon now to hear last week's episode and like 6 years of past bonus episodes, to hear this week's upcoming bonus episodes, to get access to this upcoming after show that's coming on right after this show and past after shows. Enjoy ad-free listening. You get intro-free listening. So all of this you don't get into Patreon. We just get right into the case. And you get to help support the podcast while keeping the victims' stories alive. So all of that just by joining the Patreon at one of the bonus tiers, patreon.com/Love and Murder. Now that we got the housekeeping out of the way, let's get back into this case of manipulation, obsession, and control. Samantha Mickleburgh was a 54-year-old widow from Axminster, Devon, UK, and the mother of 2 children, Alexander and Jessica. After losing her husband, she had spent years raising her children on her own while continuing to build a life for herself and her family. Those closest to Samantha described her as caring, thoughtful, generous, and devoted to the people she loved. Her family affectionately called her the Champagne Girl because she had a way of lighting up a room wherever she went. At the time of her death, Samantha was also focused on renovating a property that she had recently purchased. Like many people starting over after loss, she was trying to balance family responsibilities, financial pressures, and the hope of finding happiness again. That search for happiness is what eventually led her to James Cartwright. James was 61 years old and, on the surface, appeared to be successful and charming. He was a father of 3 adult daughters and had been married and divorced 3 times. However, behind that image was a much more complicated history. The couple met during the summer of 2022. Samantha had been looking for love when she met James, and their relationship moved quickly. Friends described it as a whirlwind romance, and by the summer of 2023, James had moved into Samantha's home. Just a few months later, in September 2023, he proposed while they were on vacation together, and Samantha said yes. Or, as James said, the proposal was met with a, quote, immediate and emphatic yes. At first, the relationship appeared serious and committed. James even later told investigators that they were extremely close and that their relationship had been loving and supportive. Around this same time is when Samantha was working on renovating that property I told you about, and James began lending her money to help with the project, initially providing £30,000 in April 2023. According to James, the costs continued to grow, and by the time Samantha secured a mortgage in July 2023, she had already owed him between £40,000 and £50,000. He eventually claimed that the amount had reached approximately £100,000 by the time she died. Shortly after returning from the vacation where they'd gotten engaged, James discovered what he described as, quote, highly sexually explicit messages between Samantha and her ex. He said that he was deeply shocked and very upset and very hurt. Instead of confronting Samantha directly, he said, quote, I chose a different tact. I wanted to catch her out. From that point forward, trust within the relationship deteriorated. Friends and family described behavior that increasingly concerned them. Samantha began telling people that James was insecure, clingy, and suffocating. And this is one of those situations where people usually brush off these behaviors because they don't seem like dangerous on their own. Constant texting, constant calling, wanting to know where you are, wanting to know who you're with. And on the surface, people will sometimes call that love or devotion. And it does depend on the person, the situation, the amount, like how much is happening. But attention and control are not the same thing. And this is what people sometimes fail to realize, like especially if the person hasn't come from attention at all. So if they come from not a really loving household and suddenly somebody is love bombing them, you have to realize the difference between attention and control. Somebody who genuinely loves you wants you to have a life outside of them. And somebody who needs to know your every move isn't actually showing love. They're showing anxiety, insecurity, a need for control. And if those behaviors go unchecked, then they can actually escalate. Her son Alexander described him as, quote, poor, pathetic, and needy. According to Alexander, if Samantha went anywhere without James, he would constantly text and call her. One of Samantha's friends and colleagues, Martin Manning, became so concerned that he offered his own home as a safe place for her if she ever needed somewhere to go. He even established a code phrase she could use if she was ever in immediate danger. And think about how serious that is for a second. Martin wasn't saying, hey, if you two argue, then, come stay with us for the night. He was actually concerned enough to make a code phrase. A code phrase. That's something people do when they're really, really worried that someone might not be safe. And when outsiders start putting safety plans in place before the victim does, that's usually a sign that the behavior has become obvious to everyone except the person stuck living through it, which I'm not blaming that person because we kind of get used to our surroundings and we don't see things happening as fast as outside people see it happening. At one point in time, Martin had actually witnessed James lose his temper after reading Samantha's emails. Quote, she caught him reading her emails, and then he lost it big time. He would shout at her and back her into a corner. It frightened her. Samantha finally ended the relationship on February 17th, 2024. But James refused to accept that it was over. And when she attempted to throw him out, James told her, quote, I'm not a real man if I let you throw me out. Oh My God. There's some men out there whose idea of what a man is completely baffles me. You're not a man if you let her throw you out? Sir, it's not your house. You're actually not a man if you act like a little bia and not leave someone's house with dignity. Let me give you a little bit of advice. If you ever have to add how much of a man you are in any sentence, then you're not actually a man. Men actually don't ever have to say those words because they just are. Just a little bit of advice. James started bombarding her with messages, turning up at her house uninvited to mow the lawn, and stalking her, which made her fear for her safety. And I know some people are probably wondering, why didn't she just, cut him off completely? But if you ever dealt with a manipulative person, you know it isn't always that simple, especially for kind people. And that's what Samantha was described as. She was a really kind person. They usually get trapped by guilt and they don't want to hurt people's feelings. They don't want to seem mean. They don't want to abandon someone who's struggling. And unfortunately, manipulative people know that and they weaponize your empathy against you. Ironically, while James was still pursuing Samantha, he was also building a new relationship. Just days after moving out, he joined Bumble, days after moving out, and started talking to other women. One of them was a woman named Ella. Ella thought that James initially seemed very attentive, quiet, and reserved. She trusted him so much that she gave him the nickname, quote, Mr. Genuine. By April 2024, James was effectively living a double life. He was telling Samantha that he wanted to reconcile while simultaneously pursuing Ella and messaging even more women. In some of those messages, he referred to Samantha as the love of my life. Yet in others, he described an upcoming birthday dinner with her as having, quote, the feel of a final farewell and, quote, the last goodbye. As James's 60th birthday approached, Samantha found herself in a difficult position. She had ended the relationship, but she also felt guilty about abandoning someone she had once cared about when another milestone birthday is coming up. Again, remember we talked about their empathy. She feels guilty abandoning someone. Exactly. According to her daughter Jessica, James repeatedly called Samantha cruel for not wanting to spend the occasion with him. And as his birthday, approached, Samantha, true to her kind nature, felt bad that he might be lonely on his day, which again, that's not your problem. He's not with you anymore. If he's lonely, he should have thought about that before he was, such a male appendage in the relationship. She agreed to honor a commitment to celebrate with him as one last kindness before they went their separate ways. Jessica didn't think it was a good idea and specifically told her mother that she didn't think she should go. If she insisted on attending, Jessica advised her to book separate rooms. Samantha ultimately compromised by reserving a twin room with separate beds to ensure that there would be no intimacy at the luxury Penny Hill Park Hotel, which, just because you have twin beds, doesn't ensure no intimacy at all. I understand why she did it. She was trying to placate both people, her daughter and this guy, but you have no loyalty to this guy. She told her son Alexander that she felt uncomfortable about the trip, but she said, quote, I made a promise and so I have to stick by it. On the morning of April 13th, 2024, Samantha dropped Alexander off at a friend's house and made it clear that this would be the last time she would ever see James. On the night of April 13th, the pair sat down for a 6-course Michelin-starred dinner at the hotel's restaurant, the Latmeyer. And I think that's how you say it, Lathymer. So now we're heading back to the night of the murder. And the investigation started back with James's own 999 call. But almost immediately, the story he gave dispatchers did not match what investigators were seeing inside that hotel room. James claimed that he had simply woken up beside Samantha and found her dead. He suggested that she may have fallen from the bed, injured her nose, or died naturally in her sleep, like I told y'all. And he even told Samantha's father that same version of, I don't know, maybe this is what happened to her. However, as police examined the room, they began to suspect that the scene had been staged to support a false story of reconciliation and consensual intimacy. One of the first things that stood out was the engagement ring on Samantha's finger. James claimed that he and Samantha had reconciled during the trip, becoming engaged again, and were planning to marry within a few months. The physical evidence made James's explanation even harder to believe. A post-mortem examination revealed that Samantha had not simply just rolled off the bed and hurt herself. She had suffered a fractured skull, along with fractures to the bones in her neck that were consistent with manual strangulation. Someone had applied pressure to her neck with their bare hands until she died. Investigators now knew they were not dealing with a sudden natural death or a freak accident. Samantha had been attacked, and James was the only other person known to have been inside her room with her. Detectives then began reconstructing the couple's final evening by speaking with staff at the restaurant. Waitress Elena Jabri remembered Samantha arriving for the 6-course meal, appearing bubbly, chatty, and excited. But around the 3rd course, something had changed, and it happened pretty quickly. Samantha became extremely sleepy, her eyes began closing, and she was seen, quote, clinging to the sofa. When Elena checked on them, James appeared annoyed by her presence and told her to leave them alone and give them some time. And personally, as the waitress, that would have been a red flag to me, because why are you getting annoyed with me for checking on her unless you were doing something untoward? Samantha claimed that she was simply full, but by the time they left the restaurant at around 10:30 p.m., she was struggling to stand and needed James to physically support her as they walked back to the room. Hotel employees were concerned because the meal was expensive, non-refundable, and the couple had left before finishing, something staff said that they had never seen happen before. Reception called the room several times before James finally answered at 10:55 p.m. and said they would not be returning. That was the last time anyone other than James was known to have seen Samantha alive. Her sudden physical decline also became an important part of the rape investigation. Prosecutors argued that Samantha was in no condition to consent to sex by the time she reached the room. She had gone from being alert and conversational to barely being able to keep her eyes open or stand without help. And yet James would later insist that they had had consensual sex before falling asleep in one another's arms. Now, in doing my research, I couldn't find a definitive toxicology explanation for why Samantha had become so sleepy, but investigators actually did not need to prove exactly what caused the change in order to question whether she was capable of consenting or not. The testimony from the hotel staff described a woman who appeared semi-conscious and physically dependent on James to get back to the room. So that's literally all they needed. As investigators continued questioning James, he maintained that he had not hurt Samantha and that her death must have been accidental or natural. To which I would be asking, did she fall and start strangling herself? How do you explain these strangulation marks, Now, we already know this, but detectives didn't. It was around this time that they discovered that James was already involved with Ella. On April 12th, the night before James met Samantha at the hotel, he had taken Ella to a Kaylee dance. He appeared to be in a happy mood, and he told her that she was the, quote, loveliest woman in the room. Now, pause here. I had to look up what a Kaylee dance was, as, I live in the U.S. First of all, I had to find out how it's pronounced because it's spelled Ceilidh, which on site, I would have pronounced it as Celly D or something like that, but it's pronounced Kaylee. So, according to kjmusic.uk, Kaylee dancing is a lively social and inclusive tradition that brings people together through music, movement, and fun. This is literally a direct quote from their site. Rooted in Scottish and Irish heritage, Kaylee's featured energetic group dances, all guided by a caller who explains the steps. So, as they're saying, no prior experience is needed. So, from what I'm gathering, this is kind of like line dancing here in the U.S. James had also lied to Ella about the hotel trip. He told her that his daughters had arranged his birthday celebration and instructed him to meet them at the hotel. After Samantha's death, he claimed that he had not expected her to be there and said that he thought his family would walk through the restaurant's doors only to discover the table had been set for two. That is the weakest explanation, and as his woman, I wouldn't have accepted that. I would have questioned everything about it. So your daughters set this up? They said, meet us at the hotel? And what are they trying to parent trap you? Which couldn't be parent trapping because that's not their mom. So why would they be setting you up with your ex? You're going to have to explain this to me really in depth and go. He also told Ella that nothing intimate had happened between him and Samantha and told her a story that Samantha had experienced a nosebleed, refused medical help, and was dead by the time he woke up. In the meantime, investigators were speaking with Samantha's family, friends, and colleagues, and those interviews showed that the relationship James described as loving and reconciled and everything like this had actually ended months earlier. As the investigation continued on, detectives also uncovered that by the time Samantha had met James, he had already developed a pattern of behavior described as controlling and coercive. Actually, James had previously received a conditional caution for harassing another former partner, something Samantha's family did not know when she first became involved with him. Now, the family didn't know it, but did Samantha know it? She probably didn't. But then again, as a nice person, she could have and was giving him the benefit of a doubt. Like he could have fed her a story and she was giving him the benefit of a doubt, you know? Either way. By that point, investigators had James's false account of an accidental death, forensic evidence showing strangulation and a fractured skull, hotel witnesses who described Samantha as barely conscious, evidence that the room had been staged, and testimony showing that Samantha had ended the relationship and was scared of James. 5 days after Samantha's death, on April 19th, 2024, James was arrested on suspicion of murder. Then on April 21st, Surrey police formally charged him with Samantha's murder and with controlling and coercive behavior. Following further examination of the evidence surrounding what happened inside the hotel room, he was also charged with raping her. Although James continued insisting that Samantha's death had been accidental and that their sexual encounter was consensual, investigators believed that the evidence showed the opposite, that Samantha had gone to the hotel as one final act of kindness, intending to end the relationship for good, and that James had attacked her when he realized that he was finally losing control of everything going on with them. The case finally went to trial on July 8th, 2025 at Guildford Crown Court. Wow, they wasted no time. He was arrested April and the trial started in July. Oh no, but it was a year because he was arrested in 2024 and charged in 2024. Okay, so yeah, it was a year. So that about tracks. Because if it was me, it would have been like he got arrested in April and in July was the trial. Over the next 3.5 weeks of this trial, jurors would hear two very different explanations for what happened that night. Prosecutors presented their theory that on the night of April 13th, The pair sat down for dinner at the hotel's restaurant. Then they returned to their room at 10:30 p.m., which was the last time Samantha was seen alive. Once inside, James's possessiveness turned into a vicious and murderous attack. He raped her and at some point inflicted a skull fracture before strangling her to death with his bare hands. Editing Kai here. Now, as I was editing this, I was reminded that on the very night before this happened, James had taken Ella out dancing, called her the most beautiful woman, lied about why he was going to a hotel. And then right after that, maybe not even 24 hours after that, he raped and murdered Samantha. Can you say diabolical? Okay, back to the case. Prosecutors argued that there was nothing accidental about Samantha's death. Instead, they told jurors that they were looking at the final act of a man who had spent months refusing to accept that the relationship was over. Prosecutor Louise Oakley said, quote, "There were only two people in this room, and she couldn't have and didn't strangle herself." That's what I was saying. Like, how would you explain she fell off a bed and then just, put her hands around her own neck? Like, that doesn't make sense. James's story became part of what the Crown's prosecution service described as James's, quote, web of lies. They told the jury that he did not call for help until 8:30 the following morning. I didn't even catch that. They went back to the room at around 10:30 p.m. And he didn't call 999 until 8:30 a.m. In the hours between the murder and the 999 call, the prosecution said that he staged a hotel room to make it look like consensual sex. Then he put the engagement ring back on Samantha's finger to support his lie that they had been re-engaged the night before. Prosecutor Moses Karoma said, quote, "As soon as he called 999, he started to weave his web of lies." From the prosecution's perspective, this case wasn't just about what happened inside the hotel room on April 13th and 14th. It was also about everything that led up to it. Jurors learned that Samantha had ended the relationship in February 2024 because she felt increasingly uncomfortable with James's behavior. They also heard about his behavior after Samantha had broken up with him. Alexander also testified about James's controlling and needy behavior. Martin testified about watching the relationship becoming increasingly unhealthy over time. And as prosecutors laid out their case, they argued that Samantha had not agreed to spend James's 60th birthday with him because they had reconciled. She had agreed because she felt guilty. Jessica testified that James guilted Samantha into spending his birthday with him, and she finally agreed after feeling the pressure. However, she didn't feel comfortable with the trip. According to the prosecution, that discomfort mattered because it directly contradicted James's claim that the weekend had become a romantic reconciliation. Prosecutors argued that Samantha viewed the trip as a final goodbye, while James saw it as an opportunity to regain control of a relationship that he refused to let go of. Attorney Oakley argued that James was, quote, cruel, repressive, and overbearing, and killed Samantha because he was losing control over her. James took the stand in his own defense, wearing a dark suit and maintaining his innocence. He claimed that he and Samantha were very close and that the relationship had been extremely amicable until he discovered her messages with her ex. He told the jury that Samantha owed him approximately £100,000 at the time of her death and pointed to the financial arrangement as evidence of trust and commitment. And so my question to that is, what does that have to do with the price of tea in Istanbul? Did he bring that up trying to say something like, well, why would I kill her if she owes me money? Is that why he brought it up? And if that's why he brought up that Samantha owes him money, well, history has shown us that that's absolutely not true. If anything, doing 6 years of this podcast Financial disputes are one of the oldest motives out there. So I don't understand why the defense thought that that was a detail in helping him look innocent. Unless his defense was telling him, don't say that. And he was like, I know what I'm doing. Because, he sounds like a controlling person. So I guess he figured that he can control every aspect of everything and he'll come out on top. I don't know. James insisted that their sexual encounter that night was consensual and that he truly believed that she had died naturally or accidentally during the night. And that was it. That was the defense. You know how you could tell that someone's guilty? There is no defense except for the tried and true argument of, please believe me. The jury took one afternoon to deliberate, which is never really a good sign, and they unanimously convicted him of rape and murder. But, which is weird to me, he was acquitted of the separate charge of controlling and coercive behavior, which I don't understand that. But the judge did note that his conduct was clearly cruel. Sentencing came on August 8th, 2025. And before imposing the sentence, Mr. Justice Murray spoke about the devastation left behind by Samantha's murder. He told the court that Samantha's family was suffering a grief that was almost impossible to put into words by saying, quote, Samantha's family suffers a grief that those who have not experienced it cannot imagine. It lies beyond words to fully describe. The judge also reflected on who Samantha was beyond the headlines and court proceedings. Rather than focusing solely on how she died, he described the woman her family had lost. She was caring, thoughtful, fun, well-organized, generous to a fault, and devoted to her family. For Samantha's loved ones, that was the person they wanted people to remember. During the hearing, family members were given an opportunity to address James directly, and Samantha's sister, Tracy Carter, delivered one of the most powerful victim impact statements of the entire case. Looking towards James, she said, quote, I believe that you are a monster, an evil, controlling, manipulative predator who really thought you were clever enough to get away with murder, my sister's murder. And I agree. He really thought he was clever. That's why he took the stand in his own defense, and there was nothing else to say about his defense. He thought he was more clever than the average bear. Tracy also spoke about the lies James told in the hours and days after Samantha's death. While the family was desperately trying to understand what happened, James was still pushing the story that Samantha had died peacefully in her sleep. Quote, did you feel proud of yourself when you lied to my father, saying that Sam had died in her sleep, knowing full well the horror that you put her through? For the family, those lies were almost as painful as the crime itself. Not only had they lost Samantha, but they had been forced to learn that the man who claimed to love her had spent months manipulating her, controlling her, and then attempted to deceive everyone after her death. But in the middle of that anger and grief, Tracy made it clear that James had failed in one important way. You have caused an indescribable amount of pain and suffering to our family, but know this. We are strong, and you cannot break us. You cannot take Sam from us. Alexander and Jessica also released a statement reflecting on the loss of their mother. They spoke about the reality of moving forward without either parent in their lives and the enormous void Samantha had left behind. Quote, nothing can prepare you to face the world without your parents at a young age. They described Samantha as someone whose love, guidance, and presence shaped every part of their lives. Her family expressed relief that he would no longer, quote, be free to harm or control any more women, and asked that Samantha be remembered for her class, integrity, and dedication to her loved ones rather than as a victim. James was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 28 years, and he received a concurrent 9-year sentence for the rape. So he's 60, they're giving him 28 years, so what is that, 88 years? He'll be 88 years old before he can parole, I guess. After James was sentenced, Samantha's family finally had what many families spent years searching for: accountability. It didn't bring Samantha back, and it certainly didn't erase what happened, but it did mean that the man responsible for her death would spend decades behind bars. Still, the sentencing hearing made it clear that the verdict hadn't ended the pain. Outside the courtroom, Samantha's family said that they hoped people would remember her for the way she lived rather than the way she died. They repeatedly emphasized that Samantha wouldn't have wanted to be defined by her murder. Instead, they wanted people to remember her for passion of life, her class, her honesty, her integrity, her strength, and her dedication to the people she loved. Meanwhile, prosecutors also reflected on the outcome of the case. Prosecutor Karoma said that the evidence had exposed the truth behind James's version of events. Quote, "The jury saw straight through Cartwright's claims that this had all resulted from her falling out of the bed." Detective Inspector Debbie Birch echoed that, saying that the case ultimately came down to one thing. Quote, "His control and possessiveness meant he couldn't bear to let her go." And I think that's what makes this case so frustrating. Samantha did everything she thought that was right. She ended the relationship and communicated that it was over. She tried to make clear boundaries while still trying to maintain her kindness. She tried to honor a commitment while still maintaining those boundaries. And none of that mattered because James had already decided that his wants were more important than her choices, which is control. And as I said before, control isn't about love. It's about entitlement. The controlling person believes that they deserve access to you, your time, your attention, your body, or your future, whether you want to give it or not. Love and relationships are not about control. Control shouldn't even be a thing that's in your relationship. And my favorite thing to tell people that I know are in a controlling relationship is that you have a mom and a dad. You didn't get into this relationship to get another mom or dad. You already have parents. You're a grown person, and nobody needs to know every iota of what you're doing, where you're going, who you're talking to, when are you going to wash your feet. Like, that's too much. Obviously, there's a certain balance in a relationship of information that should be shared. But when it comes to, you need to ask me where you're going, you need to tell me where you are every second of every day. I need to know every single word you've said to somebody. Who are you calling? Why are you calling them? Who are your friends? Why are they your friends? That's a little bit much. So by the end of the case, the image James had carefully presented to the world had basically completely fallen apart. The man who one woman had nicknamed Mr. Genuine had been convicted of rape and murder. The man who claimed Samantha died accidentally had been exposed by forensic evidence, witness testimony, and his own contradictions. And I understand that, while the court proceedings may have come to an end, and he was found guilty and put in jail and everything like that, the people who love Samantha are still left carrying the weight of her loss for the rest of their lives. And what always gets me about people like James is that they spend so much energy trying to manage everyone else, trying to control what someone wears, who they talk to, where they go, who they love, whether they stay, whether they leave. Meanwhile, the one person they never seem able to control is their damn selves. Imagine if even half of that energy had gone into working on his own insecurities, on his own jealousy, on his own emotional regulation, on his own fear of rejection. And I'm saying his, but I'm talking to every single controlling person out there. Man, woman, imagine if half the energy you spend trying to control somebody else you use to work on your own self. But instead of fixing yourself, you try to fix everyone around you, but not fix them. Just fix them for yourself. And then, when that doesn't work, some of them become dangerous. That's why controlling behavior should never be dismissed as simply somebody being like clingy or needy or overprotective or anything like that. You have to understand the differences between being overprotective, being clingy, being needy, because there are some people out there like that, but that doesn't mean they're controlling, but there are differences. And when you put all this together, sometimes that's the earliest warning sign of something much more darker about to happen. So those are my thoughts. You heard it just now. You heard it throughout the case. So what I want to hear now are your thoughts. Do you think James planned to kill Samantha before they ever arrived at the hotel? Or do you think something happened during that weekend that caused everything to spiral into violence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like even more Love and Murder, then head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder, where you'll get bonus episodes like last week's bonus and this week's bonus that's coming out, and the after show that's coming out right after this case. So if you forgot, the last bonus episode basically almost had me flipping my entire desk over, jumping out the window and running down the street screaming, blah, 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 blah. It really messed with my head. It was the heartbreaking case of 7-year-old Athena Strand, a little girl who disappeared while playing outside of her family's property. And that set off a search with the entire community. And it's such a heartbreaking case. So, listener discretion is advised. And then coming up this week on the Patreon is actually an SKC serial killer corner of 2 nursing aides whose relationship evolved into something darker, leading investigators to uncover a series of deaths that shocked Michigan's nursing home and left people questioning who was really pulling the strings. So join our Patreon at one of the bonus tiers for any of these bonus episodes, past bonus episodes, ad-free listening, intro-free listening, exclusive content, and early access to select episodes, while all of this helping to support the podcast, keep the podcast listener funding, and keep victim stories alive. And before you go, if this episode resonated with you, taught you something, or if you know someone who's going through something like anything you heard in this case, then please share this case with them. Whether it's sending a text, sharing it on social media, or posting it in one of your favorite true crime groups, or just simply telling a friend about the podcast. Every share helps Love and Murder reach new listeners, and it also helps ensure these victim stories continues to be heard. And my goal of helping, even if it's just one person, not make a huge mistake that usually lands people on Love and Murder. So please share. And if you were part of the Patreon, then you know your after show is coming up. And this after show is about, when first responders arrived at a home in Georgia for a report of an unresponsive 1-year-old, they found much more than a medical emergency. Children were alone and so hungry that they were eating roaches. So join the Patreon if you want to hear the after show, and you get the after show at only the $3 tier or above. So you can start off at the $3 tier and you will get the after show. And that is all I have for you today. And like I like to end every full episode, I want to remind you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Thank you for sharing, if you shared. And I'll see you in the next episode. Unless, of course, you're part of the Patreon, then I'll see you in the after show starting in 3, 2, 1.